Yeah.
Hey there, Jen.
I hear you have a problem.
I always have a problem, but I've got a good one this week. So here's the deal. I've always been a one-man band, and I want to start adding some additional people to my team. And I want to start with Bob. Bob is helps me with a lot of the stuff on my trips. So I'm thinking of adding him in as a planner, as a, whatever. So what I know Yuli can do that, but I really haven't played around with that. Can you show me where that is, please?
Absolutely. YouLi has a really powerful team member feature. So you can get to that from account and then clicking team members. And then from here, depending on the level of the plan that you have, you can add a certain number of team members. So from here, if you wanted to say, invite Bob, like what kind of function does he play within the team? Like, would you want him to be a team admin where he can actually do everything, including adding other users?
Oof, that sounds like too much responsibility to give to Bob. So if we add him on as a user, if I add him on as a team member, he just sees the trip information. I'll let you
Yeah,
add him in first.
exactly. Yeah. So if you choose to make him a team member, then you have another decision to make, which is whether or not he has access to all trips in the account or restrict access by trip tags, in which case you could say he only helps you with retreats, for example,
Aha,
instead of
very
your
cool.
workshops.
All right. But if, go ahead and add him here. Go ahead and add him like this. Excellent, because I want to see how it looks.
So now we have Bob has been added as a team member, but he's tag restricted as compared to other team members that have access to all trips.
Okay. What if now, so we limited him to just retreats. What if I just want him restricted to a particular trip? Can we do that?
You can do that. And now that you've added him, you could come in here and change him to be per trip access only, and then go to the trip and add him. But we're actually going to jump into the trip and show you how you would do it if you started from the trip. So there's always a couple of ways to do these things. So we're just going to jump into a trip because I think often when you're adding people for a single trip, you don't need to go and add them as a team member, right? They're really more of a trip planner. So that's why we have this functionality here on every trip called Manage Trip Planners. Now, only team members are allowed to come and manage trip planners on your trips. So that's important to know in terms of that kind of access. And your team members or yourself, if you're the team owner, you can come into this page and you can choose to add a user. I'm just going to pause a second and show you. Here are all the users who can access this trip. So you can see team admins, team members, and you can see these co-planners and these trip coordinators. So that's what I'm thinking maybe is the right one for Bob. So I'm going to come in here and just say Bob plus trip. We're going to add him at the trip level instead of at the team member level. So
Yes.
we have two options here that are included in most plans. These are the trip coordinator, view only role, and the co-planner, which has edit access to things. So have you ever thought about this? Like, do you think Bob is kind of like a coordinator who should just see and communicate, like send messages, but not be able to edit anything? Or do you think he's like, yeah, actually, I want him to, update the schedule. So like, turns out we're actually going to have dinner at 8 instead of 7. And so I want him to go in and be able to change the time on the itinerary.
Up until now, I was just having him look at flight schedules. So view only would have been good. But now that I'm thinking about it, I trust him a little bit more. And I think a co-planner role would be excellent for him. Now, I don't know if I want him to be able to do everything. So I'm going to ask him a little bit if we can kind of narrow down a very specific role for him. But for right now, I think a co-planner would be great.
So if we add him as a co-planner, we're going to go ahead and put him on here. And you can decide whether or not he's listed as a contact or not. And that just means whether or not his information is published on the trip page for travelers to contact with questions about the trip. And then you just indicate kind of like, okay, he's a colleague. And keeping in mind, this choice isn't as important for the co-planner role. But when you're choosing trip coordinator, if you don't say yes to listed as a contact, they cannot message people. So the idea behind that is that you need to tell people who they're going to be hearing from. So you need to set them to yes. And in that case, they can send messages. So if you set them to no, think of those as sort of like the back end people that don't talk to anybody. But if you set them to yes, then they're trip coordinators who are out there, they're the face of the trip. They're the ones that people are expecting to get emails from. But if you choose to make them a co-planner, they have access to a lot more. So they can send messages whether or not they are listed as a contact. So you could say, no, he's not listed as a contact. But even still, because he's a co-planner, he will have that ability to send messages.
Excellent.
So we're going to go ahead and add him as a co-planner. And so now you can see that he's popped up here as a co-planner. And you can see I've set him as no for the trip page contact, but you can always change that. So you can always come back in here and change your mind. So he will appear on the trip page. And then that means that he can basically access everything except for managed trip planners, and he won't be able to change your pricing because we don't want someone accidentally modifying the prices here and or changing the information so that the bank transfers go to his bank account instead of your bank account. So that's why we don't allow co-planners to edit any of the information on this particular form, but they can edit everything else: overview, settings, managing rooming list, trip CRM, highlights, payments, tasks, documents, trip coupon.
Cool. So he's got access to just about everything except for changing the price and some of the financial details so that my business doesn't get derailed by Bob.
Exactly.
Perfect. Now that I'm thinking about it, that's an awful lot of access for somebody who was just looking at flight information before and now letting him see everything. I'm not sure I'm quite comfortable giving him that much free rein.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me about what we can do to kind of limit exactly what he does and doesn't see.
Yeah, so and so I'm going to go ahead and add a different one to show you how you would add them as a different role. And so before we said, trip coordinator, view only, or co-planner, edit almost everything. But now you're saying actually you'd like to have a sort of a modified version. And this is what comes into what we call custom roles. So here I've got 4 examples of custom roles: host, guide, accounting, and group leader. So like a host would be somebody who's, they're going on the trip, they're hosting the trip, they're not running operations, they're not actually the one responsible for flight itineraries or ground operations or anything. They're probably mostly responsible for marketing and also just being the host on the trip. So they need to know what's going on, they need to know who all the people are, but they really shouldn't be trusted with much of the operations. So they would probably have view access to trip CRM, ability to send messages, probably not access to the money payments, not no access to edit the schedule, but maybe the ability to view it in detail, even the things that are hidden from travelers. So that's one example of a custom role. Another one would be like a guide. So this could be somebody who is like the ground operations person. So you probably want them to be able to edit the schedule and the itinerary items because they're the ones who are deciding, okay, yep, I managed to get the bus at 8:30. Here's the contact details for the bus driver. And they're the ones putting all that information in. And so they need to edit that. But you don't really want them to be communicating with guests. So you don't give them access to the trip CRM. You don't want them to access necessarily their task information that, they're uploading passports and things like that. You probably don't want the guide to be accessing that. So you just give them the ability to edit the itinerary. And then accounting, kind of the other way around. Don't give them any access to itineraries or trip CRMs. You just give them access to manage payments, because they're just going in and reconciling payments, marking them as received, making sure all the money is where it's meant to be. And then this last one might be a Bob one. Group leader is kind of a generic concept, but that could be something like you've got maybe a community leader who's reached out to you and said, I really want you to take my community on a retreat. And they're kind of the thought leader. They're the telling you who's coming. They're the ones who are deciding how busy should the schedule be, right? And you're really just supporting their vision. And so you might give them access to quite a lot, but maybe you don't give them access to make coupons, for example, because that's not really, because you're the one running the operations. You need to make sure that you're making enough money on this. And they're really the one that's sort of doing a lot of the admin and the outreach to their community to make sure that the trip gets filled. Does any of that sound like Bob?
I think the group leader piece works fine for now. Let me ask you this, because I know YouLi's pretty smart. Am I able to get very granular and maybe talk with somebody at YouLi and say, I want to create the Super Bob position? I'm not sure what I would really call it. And say, let's give him this, but this, and this, but not this, and maybe this, and really get down to a granular level and create a Super Bob position. Can we do that?
You absolutely can. And this is where you're going to want to click on this Learn More link and dig into the documentation of all the different features that they can access. And we'll actually share a link to a form where you can go through and say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And you even get to decide the name of your role, so that when you're clicking this drop down, that name shows here for you. And it can be Super Bob. I mean, there's no reason you can't call it a Super Bob role. So for those of you who are watching this, these 4 are examples of custom roles. They are the equivalent of a Super Bob that I've just set up here for the purposes of demonstration. In your account, you'll only see these 2 options by default, and you'll need to request the creation of a host role if that's what you want, or a guide role, or a Super Bob role. And those can be for as little as $150 per annum, depending on your account and depending on the level of access that's required. We also allow you to buy these in bulk. So if you have a lot of hosts, you run hundreds of trips, and you have a host for every single trip, we don't charge you at the same level as we do for team members. So if you have the need to buy some of these custom roles in bulk, we definitely have that pricing as well. So first step, if you are looking to be that fine-grained, is to click on the Learn More, dig through here, get an understanding of what you want to do, and then you'll be able to click in to submit the form, and then we can give you the pricing for that role. And once it's approved, it'll pop up here so you can start adding people. So that's how you can either grant Bob access to, everything but restricted to certain trips. And then maybe even going down to the level of, nope, he's just going to be co-planning on this trip, or he's just going to be a trip coordinator on this trip, or maybe even that he's a custom role that is Super Bob and super specific.
I'm going to throw one last thing at you. I've got a host, I've got a Super Bob, I've got a coordinator, I've got all these funky roles, okay? And something gets deleted off the site, a user gets deleted, or something gets screwed up. How do I know which one of my now expanded team members needs to be sacked? Maybe not sacked, re-educated.
Re-educated, yes. So if you need to know who has done the right thing or the wrong thing, you can click to trip summary and scroll down. And so by default, it's showing the last 7 days. And so you can see the activity that I've taken here. And so you can see that I added Bob, for example. So if you wanted to know, wait, it looks like Bob added someone to the trip, right? It'll say Bob added someone to the trip. In this case, it's just showing that I have added Bob to the trip. And you can go all the way back to the last 12 months. And you can also filter out to just look at planner activity, which is what you're talking about. And you can also see traveler activity. So we're just going to filter out and just see all the things that the planners are doing to this trip. And you can see updated hot air balloon rides. You can see all sorts of changes made to library items and food and custom forms. So, and you can see exactly what happened. So you can pinpoint exactly who to get re-educated.
Perfect. I love this. And it's giving me a whole new idea of how I can expand my team and still maintain the control of who gets to see what. So that makes me very, very happy.
Amazing. Well, I look forward to seeing your request for the Super Bob custom role. And then I look forward to sharing some more insights on some advanced ways to use these custom roles to manage accommodation group leaders, which have,
Ooh.
put everything else that we talked about aside. All they can do is actually manage rooming allocation on a particular trip. So this is especially powerful when you're doing student travel and you've got a whole bunch of kids and you have someone at the client who actually knows who all these kids are and who they should be rooming with. And you just give them an accommodation group leader role and they jump in and they put all that information in for you. So you don't have to get that spreadsheet and then have to enter it yourself.
Way cool. Awesome. I look forward to seeing that.
All right. Hopefully solved your problem, Nick.
You did once again, Jen. Thanks so much. I will see you the next time I have a problem.